Hello and welcome back, and today we want to continue looking at the Synology HAT5300. I know I've talked a lot about these drives in the last few weeks, but I do think they are important. Not only are they a big step from the brand to create a far more complete ecosystem and data storage solution at the enterprise level, but also a number of us just want to know whether these Synology hard drives are actually much cop. Now, we've talked about them a lot, we've talked about their advantages, their disadvantages, and finally we have them here. Now, this video is part of a 7-part series of videos. That's right, 7, you're going to be sick of me. 7-part series of videos where we are going to be looking at these hard drives. In today's video, we are using the Sprint USB 3 dock here, USB 3.1 Gen 2, 3.2 Gen 2 I should say, docking station there, and we're going to be running single drive testing. Now, we are using the 8TB drive. Synology has sent us 4 8TB drives to utilise in our testing. In our next video, if you want to stay tuned for that, is when we're going to be looking at 10 GBE and RAID performance here on the DS1621XS Plus, where we're going to be looking at that. And in the follow-up videos after that, we're going to be comparing these drives against a number of other drives in the field right now for both prosumer and enterprise and SMB level storage, such as the likes of the WD Red Pro, the WD Ultrastar, and we do have some Seagate Iron Wolf and Exos drives coming very, very soon as well. So in today's video, we are going to be looking at these Synology drives in a single drive utilization. We're going to be kind of focusing on a single drive. We're going to be utilizing the dock here on a Windows 10 environment. And we're going to be running a myriad of single drive testings, ranging from the traditional Blackmagic and AJA through to Atto benchmark and perhaps some disk test there, the crystal disk. And we just want to get some idea about the performance these drives have. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, we did already do plenty of overviews on these drives and before you buy it as well. We looked at ultimately some of the reasons why a number of you not only will go for the larger scale Synology solutions where these drives are kind of locked in, but also users that are considering these drives for desktop utilization or Synology NAS systems which have a wider compatibility arrangement on their supported lists. Now, the 8TB drive knocks around for about 250 NICA, depending on where you are in the world, the local tax, availability and stuff like that. And obviously you can buy them in smaller quantities, but these are designed for large-scale arrays. Now, the 8TB model has a reported 240 megabytes per second performance rating, although there is sustained performance thresholds as well. And although in today's video we're looking at a single drive, it's worth highlighting that, of course, in larger RAID arrays and different file structures, that performance will differ in a number of ways. On top of that, it arrives with a 2.5 million mean time to failure, or MTTF, and a 550 terabytes per year workload rating, which is one of the reasons a number of us are very interested in this drive. Now, I mentioned before that we are going to be comparing this in later videos directly in terms of on-screen performance comparison in different regimented tests in Synology systems, maybe factoring in the rack mount, the RS3621XS Plus as well. But even straight away on this single drive testing, we can take a good look at the drive itself, hopefully without my light ruining it for us here. So again, it's very industrial in design, and again, it has to be said that Synology are not being secretive about the fact that these are Toshiba drives. That doesn't make them bad. If anything, the only reason Toshiba's not a bigger name in the last few years in the world of NAS is simply the amount of money they pour into marketing is dwarfed by that of WD and Seagate. And last few iterations of Toshiba enterprise grade server drive have rated very, very well in a number of different areas. Even on the drive itself, it does carry the Toshiba Part ID inclusive of the Synology as well. Same goes for the bag as well. They're very, very clear that it is a Toshiba drive right there at the top. And this is the MG06 series. As mentioned, the different capacities do use slightly different architecture. Not a huge amount, but noticeable in their model IDs from the Toshiba side. But of course, there is the Synology firmware inside there as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this drive inside that dock. You may have noticed we've also got the audio sensor on there. We might try and factor that in some of the later videos. But let's get this drive installed inside this dock and get some idea about the performance we can expect from each of these drives. So here we are on the desktop of my PC here. We've applied a decibel meter to the left-hand side of the screen there. And again, this isn't going to be forensic level set up, so that's more for guidance. The sound there on the left-hand side, if I'm quiet for a moment, we've already booted up the drive for the first time, but let's be quiet for a second. So a general dB level there marked at 22, maybe 23 there, at the lowest point about 20. And what I'm going to do very quickly is I'm going to turn the drive off so we can get a good semblance of with and without the drive. So let's go ahead. And turn the drive off. So again, not a marked difference there between the drive being active and not in this single drive area. So once again, let's boot the drive up and be quiet for about 15 to 20 seconds to get some idea about the noise the drive will generally make when it's booting. As it's an enterprise class drive, I think we can expect it to be quite a loud noise there, but let's go ahead. And, you know, moderately kind of modest spin-up noise there. I know the microphone I'm speaking on today, you're not really going to pick up most of that, so that's where the dB meter comes in. But just to put that into perspective, when you look at some of my audio testing of some other Pro and Enterprise class drives, that's actually quite a modest spin-up there. Just to put it into perspective, what I'm going to do now is power the drive down, and then I'm going to swap it out with an enterprise class drive. I'm not going to say which one, we're not going to be naming and shaming here, but this is going to be another drive from a similar class of architecture. Let's remove that out. And this is a 550 TBW drive at the same performance, 7200 RPM. Just to give you some idea about the difference in spin-up noise between these drives, I'm going to spin this one up now. Hopefully some of that noise was picked up on the mic as well as, of course, on the dB meter there, but you can certainly see a difference there in terms of spin-up noise on those two drives that we just mentioned. Let's power that one back down, and then we're going to switch back to the Synology drive and mount it on this Windows 10 Pro machine. I know generally you should leave a drive for a short period before removing it from a dock. I'm being as careful as I can without wasting all of your time. So let's put that drive in there, and we'll go ahead and boot that drive up again, in case you need to hear it again. So we've allowed the drive to initialize. The next thing we want to do is make our way into the storage manager. Chances are we're not going to be able to see this drive for the very first time. We're going to have to go into disk part and do some of our configuration there in the background. It's going to allow it to go into the storage manager, and what we're going to do is just simply mount this single drive. So as you see, we've got to initialize the drive for the very first time. It's the 8 TB there, so we're just going to initialize it just as a standard drive there, and we're going to mount it as a nice simple volume. Nothing too snazzy there. I'll leave it on drive E. We're going to name the label, why not? This will be HAT5300 8 TB. So again, we're not going to worry too much. It's a brand new drive. It's not been booted before, so we're not going to worry too much about the formatting. We'll allow the drive to be initialized, and then it'll be available to us as volume for some of our testing. Now, throughout the course of this video, I will continue. We've got the drive there. I'll continue to have the audio monitor there on the left-hand side of the screen. So throughout the testing, we'll be able to get a little understanding about how much noise the drive is going to generate while we run each of the tests. And I'll try to remain as quiet as possible during those tests, while simultaneously trying to give a little bit of voiceover for those. So let's go with the basic stuff first. We're going to go for AJA. We're going to go for, first up, a 1 gig test file there, nice and straightforward. We're going to make sure we select drive E there. We're not using any disk caching whatsoever. We're going to open up the performance monitor there at the bottom, and we're going to go for turn-based read and write performance on this single drive. So let's go ahead and begin this test. I'm going to click the button, and I'm going to remain quiet throughout the early stages of this test so we can get a little understanding of the noise this drive might generate throughout the course of this test. Also, do keep an ear open for when the write and read switch, because that's generally an area where a more enterprise drive might be more audible. Obviously, this drive is designed for rack mount utilization, so in most cases you wouldn't even hear a lot of this noise over the noise of a rack mount. But let's start the test and remain quiet just for a little bit with a light bit of commentary there. So not much in terms of noise as we do turn-by-turn based read and write. I think we're kind of consistently hitting that 228 to 230 average between the two of them. That's the 1 gig test file. Now we're going to ramp it up just a little bit there. We're going to go for a 4 gig file. So this will take obviously 4 times as long, but we'll see. But let's go ahead and begin that test. As you can see, this is where we're seeing a lot of that endurance factor that Synology like to talk about on these drives. We're seeing that 230 mark largely being consistently hit. Now, you may notice at the early stages of each of these tests, you're witnessing it there on the read, that the first part is the drive spin up or switch between each of the different kind of architecture of performance there, as the arm and actuator inside is either applying or accessing existing data on the platters. We're still seeing that 230 get hit pretty well there on that 4 gig. So let's come out of that one, and finally we're going to make our way into the largest of the lot, the 16 gig test file. And once again, if you do see any little graphical blips in this, we are utilizing OBS there for our recording with everything on screen, so you might see the occasional blip there throughout the course of it. But we're going to go for the 16 gig test file there, and we're going to go ahead and continue with that same codec type and a 1080p HD file, and we're going to go ahead and begin this largest of the test. We're just going to do a single write and a single read, and remain quiet for a big chunk of it, but this will give us some idea about the consistent performance and how long it can hold on to those high figures. So we're halfway through the write, and again we are maintaining that 230 MBS there throughout the course of that test. The audio there was just dipping into the very, very low 20s, exactly what you would expect from a drive of this caliber. And when this kicks into the read, what we're going to be doing is taking a quick look at that spec sheet at the same time, because this drive does have a reported performance higher than this, but it's worth highlighting that the performance measurements Synology do provide, they do make painful links to highlight that that performance is within a NAS environment. So you have to kind of bear that in mind. This is quite individual testing there, and we will be running some other software. But for now, let's take a look at that read. and it's living there in the 230 still, and it consistently held that max 230 there throughout the course of that write test there. And if we let the read run it in the background, we can see if we go to the official pages, they do rate that this drive has a performance threshold there at the 8 TB of 230 megs. So again, straight away there, fair play to them. They have been quite upfront about it, and that drive is indeed maintaining that 230 megs per second that is advertised on that drive. So again, solid win for them early doors. We're going to let that read finish there before we switch on to another application. We have a few to flick through. I'm not going to spend as much time with the majority of the others as I am with AJA, because I do think AJA is kind of given us the most consistent, more customizable performance there. We're going to be looking at other stuff along with sound. I'm going to let that finish up on read before we switch on to the next test. And again, lovely consistent read performance there throughout. I think that's been quite a successful jaunt for them. Fair play to them for that. So we're going to come out of it there. And from here, we're going to make our way into another test regimen. What I'm going to do is quickly save these results so I can use these in another context, and we'll make our way onto the next test. Next, we want to look at the reported IOPS of the Synology HAT5300 series of drives. So what we're going to do is run this test through on Atto Disk Benchmark, and that should give us a good understanding of the IOPS. Now, bear in mind, we are talking about a hard drive here, not an SSD. IOPS are generally something we measure in the hundreds of thousands with modern enterprise-grade SSDs, but with enterprise hard drives, we will be looking at figures in the 4,000 and 5,000. So do bear 4 and 5 figures there, I should say. So let's go ahead and run this test here to see what exactly we're going to get in terms of IOPS from a single enterprise Synology 3.5-inch 8 TB hard drive. So we're going to run this test, and we're going to listen to the noise in the background, and I'm going to leave it running and maybe fast forward the majority of this test, but give you the initial audio level there at the beginning. Right, so the range of IOPS testing with Atto Disk Benchmark has completed, and unsurprisingly, the IOPS have only just dipped into the tens of thousands. Now again, understandable hard drive. These are the sort of specs that we saw for the likes of the Ultrastar series as well, so these do stand up to enterprise grade hard drives, it has to be said. So anyone looking at this with eyes on the likes of SSDs with 50 or even 100,000s of IOPS ratings there, you're not going to see that on these. It is still pretty good, and do bear in mind that these are drives that are going to go in a rack mount larger array, so you of course have to bear that in mind too once you're going for the larger scale environments. Now, as mentioned, IOPS isn't something that they really talk about that much, unsurprisingly, on specification sheets, and that doesn't just go for the likes of hard drives, that from Synology, of course, other brands as well. Very rarely mention IOPS with regards to hard drives. The only reason we include it here is a number of you will be using such large scale environments that chances are this may be something you'd want to bear in mind there. And of course, with Atto Disk Benchmark, we can go into the read and write there and see once again consistent 230 there all the way through with each of that barrage of testing. Obviously, with the smaller file types, we saw a bit of a dip there, something that I think will be replicated in our Windows testing with the drag and drop tests coming very shortly. But again, all of that consistent 230 all the way through. We're definitely maxing out that drive, but also consistent as well. So let's move on to the next stage of testing. Okay, so for our first test, we're going to be looking at transmitting a single 10 gig file into the HAT5300 ATB drive here over USB. Now, of course, we are using USB, but that gives us more than enough bandwidth there for this drive with its reported so far 230 megabytes per second performance. So let's see how consistent that performance is when transferring a single large file. We have a 10 gig file here. This is a video file that we used for our live streams last year. As you can see there, it is a 10 gig file right there. It is massive. We're going to go ahead, copy that file from my local drive. And again, it's worth highlighting, if we go back, my local drive, it's an NVMe that we're utilizing here. So again, there's no bottleneck here from my core system that's going to be transferring that over there. And if we look at the general system properties, we're able to see we are using an Intel i7 6-core processor there and 32 gig of memory inside Windows 10 Home. So again, a fairly bolstered system here that we're going to do that transfer for. When I do the transfer of this file, I'm going to try to be quiet there for our sound measurements on the left hand side of the screen. So let's go ahead and transfer this file. 3, 2, 1, go. So a nice straightforward transfer there, it has to be said, and again peaking well into the 200s. I think it spiked at the very highest at 234, 235, but consistently lived somewhere around 215 to 220, which is more than respectable for a single large file of this caliber. So next we're going to transfer 10 gig just over of loose files. These are going to be mixed files, a number of kinds. This is one of my backups here of just background files and stock content. If we go into the useful files there, we'll be able to see it's 10.3 gig of data across 6,281 files across 22 folders. So a huge variety of images, video, templates, Word documents, scripts, everything you can think of there, and zip files and PowerPoints. So an enormous array of data there we're going to be copying over. It's only 10 gig, but it is 10 gig of very, very mixed files. So we're going to go ahead and copy that into the drive once again. So immediately there you can definitely see the difference there between different file types. With the large ISO files like the one that's copying right now, you can see high consistent performance with those larger file types. But due to the flicking around of those smaller files there in the background, the time does differ wildly. So as we go into the small files, you can see the drive obviously has to correspond and change its read-write performance in relation to the large myriad of hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller files there. But still, nevertheless, we are still seeing great speeds. Don't worry too much about the time remaining stat there, because obviously it's based on an average that's changing wildly as we go through larger file types. And what we're seeing is the drive is handling things, on average, pretty darn well. We're seeing the large file types spike up to that 2 and 230 that we saw before, and we're seeing the slowdown as expected when we go with the hugely large array of smaller file types there throughout as we transfer these files. So we'll let that continue there towards the end. We're also hearing that drive there in the background just the tiniest bit more as it has to flick that arm around for those smaller smaller files going onto the platter. Let's listen again. We're certainly noticing there the difference in the head as it has to move around there, but again, lovely performance here being displayed by the drive for that 6,300 files that we're transferring, and the job is complete. Some lovely easy level performance there all the way through transferring a single 10 and a multi-part 10 gig file. Now, I'm going to end this real quickly on a nice simple Blackmagic speed test, and I'm just going to do this as a light test here to give you guys some idea about this drive. Just to end on, bear in mind in the next part of this series we will be putting 4 drives, all 4 of our HAT5300 drive 8 TBs into the DS1621XS Plus, so stay tuned for that in the RAID 0 and RAID 5 environment testing. So do stay tuned for that, but for now let's go ahead and go for a 1 gig test file first, and we're going to of course be selecting our drive there. So we've got our drives pre-selected, Click folder OK. And we're just going to run an initial Blackmagic speed test. Once again, I'm going to let this run a few rotations and be quiet in the background. Bear in mind that a 1 gig test file is probably going to need a bit more time to spin up and complete the job before this drive can give you true performance. So the 1 gig test, although I'm going to show it to you, I'd stay tuned for the 4 gig test more than anything. But let's start this test. So some fairly respectable figures there, both in read and write, hitting 228, 230 consistently all the way through, both in write and read. So some lovely figures there. So now we're going to flick to a 5 gig test file. This will give us another test of that whole durability, or moreover, not durability, the ability to sustain that performance that we just talked about. So let's go ahead and start the test. So as you see, some lovely performance there, sustained throughout the 5 gig test files there on Blackmagic. And I think we're going to wrap things up there for our single drive testing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I do apologise if the test laptop that I've been using throughout the course of this video, you've heard the fans ramp up the tiniest bit. I tried to create as many layers between the system and the drive being tested, but occasionally, of course, some of that has made its way onto the mic that I'm recording on. Don't worry, that shouldn't have affected the dB rating there on the other side of things for the drive. But stay tuned for my RAID 5 4 disk testing over 10 GBE coming very, very soon. And of course, after that, we'll be going to go in for the comparison performance testing with other drives to see just how well the Synology hard drive series ranks up against Pro and Enterprise drives from the current standing NAS favourites. So stay tuned for those. But otherwise, click like if you've enjoyed this video. Click subscribe to learn more. There should be an article in the description where we go through all of the results, lots of photos of all the different stuff we've seen in today's video. So go through there if you want to see a more detailed read-write stats below. And otherwise, I will see you next time.